I said, why wouldn't we want, and wouldn't it be nice if we could get along with Russia and get along with something? What are we, crazy? They say Donald Trump loves Putin. I don't love, I don't hate. We'll see how it works. We'll see. I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin. If we could get Russia to help us get rid of ISIS, if we could actually be friendly with Russia, wouldn't that be a good thing? Is that it's so bad?
Well, during the campaign, American security agencies suspected Russia and Vladimir Putin himself of orchestrating a breathtaking cyber attack aimed at undermining U.S. democracy. In October, the U.S. formally accused the Kremlin of directing hacks of the Democratic National Committee. And last Friday, the Washington Post reported that Russia helped spread fake news in an effort to damage Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. Specifically, Russia's propaganda arm, Sputnik, it's called, falsely alleged that Clinton was taking a Parkinson's drug to treat fatigue, and that a U.S. base in Turkey was surrounded by Turkish troops during last summer's coup. Well, the Kremlin's propaganda machinery also pushed a fake story that people were paid to protest at Trump rallies. Some of these stories were read more than 8 million times. For more, I'm joined right now by Malcolm Nance, MSNBC terrorism analyst and author of The Plot to Hack America. Malcolm, give us a sense. We know about the hacking of the DNC material and of what John Podesta's, and that served to sort of create a little mishigas in the Democratic world, embarrass some people, Donna Brazile, people like that get into trouble over that. So we know that part. Tell us about the other part of their mischief-making here, this fake news, this attempt to create propaganda that gets into the hearts and minds of voters here.
Well, it's been very, very well documented over the last 3 to 4 months that Russia has, and we've always known this because, as you said a little earlier, people running around chasing the KGB and the Soviet Union. The country may have changed its political leadership, but they have not changed their propaganda and intelligence operations machinery. And they applied every aspect of that against this U.S. election, including highly detailed propaganda organizations and using their state organs, Sputnik, Russia Today, and paid trolls who operated, the New York Times identified them operating out of St. Petersburg, the trolls of Alinka, who created thousands of pro-Trump organizations and Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds and spread propaganda on a massive scale.
How do they have there ever been examples where they penetrate into the mainstream press here? They've gotten into one of the major news networks. Have they gotten into the major quality newspapers? Have they broken into our system, which we do? I know the right doesn't, but I trust. Have they ever broken through the wall into real journalism here?
Well, I personally can't attest to them breaking into the mainstream media, but what I can attest to is that they broke through the entirety of the alternative media world that guided all of the Trump campaign, tweets coming from Donald Trump and tweets going throughout their entire constellation of pro-Trump organizations. Russia practically ran that. I myself have been attacked by pro-Trump trolls and featured in Sputnik once it came out that we had identified their intelligence operation.
What do you think their primary goal, if they have, and was it to get Trump elected, or it was to diminish the worldwide respect for our democracy?
I would like to think that an organization of the FSB's magnitude, led by a former director of the, a former KGB officer and director of the FSB, would only want to create mischief and mayhem in the United States electoral system. But the process was so deliberate. An organizational operation like this would have taken hundreds of operators who would have had to have watched carefully the machinery of the United States on a minute-to-minute basis with regards to hacking and leaking the information in the way that they did. To do that, that means that they were, and obviously they only favored one candidate, and that candidate was elected.
And clearly going after the Democratic National Committee and embarrassing people with all those emails clearly was not addressed to the Republican National Committee at all.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, the only hacks that occurred, as we understand it, was Lindsey Graham an adamant opponent against Russia and the Ukraine, John McCain and Colin Powell. Colin Powell, who would have been the most, the most noteworthy of the conservatives who would have endorsed Hillary Clinton, and they took him out very early by mid-September. So this was Watergate 2.0, only they got away with everything.
I love your reporting. Thank you so much, Malcolm. It's fabulous having you on. We're now joined by Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's from Connecticut. Senator Murphy, thank you. I bumped into you last night on another show. We'd like to have you here, of course, as often as possible. What can the Senate do in a bipartisan fashion to really do a kind of an old, Fulbright kind of investigation we're all proud of, a Frank Church investigation, and really bring to light what the Russians attempted to do, what they got away with, and the consequences of their nasty or mischievous work here in this country?
Well, I think there are two things that we can do. One, as you noted, is we can have a bipartisan investigation, and we can do it right now. There's no reason to wait until Trump is inaugurated. We can begin to start that investigation, to collect the information right now and put it on the record, to have open hearings talking about what the Russians did to try to influence this election. Maybe they didn't break into the mainstream media, but the fact of the matter is most swing voters are getting their information from Facebook, and they clearly penetrated that space. If they get away with it without any investigation from Congress, without any repercussions, then what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. We know that the Russians were trying to penetrate voter files. Penetrating voter files is the precursor to actually being able to manipulate election day results. That's the next step for the Russians if they don't feel that there were any repercussions here. The second step, Chris, though, is that at the end of that investigation, which will find that they successfully manipulated this election in favor of Trump, is sanctions. And we've sanctioned the Russians for trying to manipulate elections in Ukraine. But why wouldn't we sanction them for trying to manipulate elections here? That
Okay,
has to
how
be
could
part
they
of this as well.
manipulate the vote? How could they manipulate the vote count? How could they do that?
Well, so they can go into the voter files, right? They can go in and compromise voter files.
How can they do it? Tell me how it works. How do they how does a Mr. Jones show up in Philly or Connecticut and vote somehow that doesn't exist? How do they create a number of new votes that aren't there legally?
So in many states, voter files are online, but the election results are not. What would happen if on election day, Democrats showed up to the polls and found that their names had been erased from the voter files and Republicans had not? There are clearly ways that you can manipulate voter files without manipulating the machines themselves to influence an election. And why were they trying to penetrate these voter files if it wasn't to try to influence the election in favor of Trump, which clearly was their rationale all along?
I'll promise you this, Senator, if you do this investigation on the level that Fulbright and people like Frank Church did in the old days, you're going to get a lot of attention. This country wants to know the answer because this may be the first time they really showed their face in this country in terms of interfering with our democracy, something they don't have, by the way. I'd like to make sure we stop them at the wall right now.